Okay, final video. We have clustered our data into 4 different clusters, and you can sort of see the size of each one of them, the BMI that was associated, because these are sort of intervention sort of questions, and then you can see the amount of null values because that's pretty important as well. And now what we're going to do is click on Analyze Clusters, and what we're trying to do really is figure out what is the true difference, like what's happening in between these clusters. So the what this first piece does, this cluster differences, is it allows someone to go in and sort of look at. So in this case, we're looking at cluster 0, and this is the number of differences to display. So that's why you only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You only have 5 of these sort of uh, reasons why this cluster is different. So this is the question that this is answering. Why is this cluster different than everyone else? That's really the question, right? And so if you looked at it, you said, all right, the mean of this particular question, this me exercise with me, is 2.5 for this cluster, and the overall mean is 0.66. So, and then the standard deviations and so on and so on and so forth. But and the overall means the entire data. And so if you started looking at it and say, okay, well, so what's small? What is a small number? So small numbers are the response a few times, and big numbers are very often. So for this particular question, this group answers bigger. So in other words, towards very often more than the rest of the entire data set. So that's what you're looking at. And if you want to look at more, than just 5, you can obviously look for all 232 of the questions and see how they're different. But you can just make this as big as you want it. You drag it over, and then it just sort of drops down and lets you see. And this difference is you're doing this subtraction, but then you're dividing by the standard deviation in order to get this difference, this standardized difference, if you will. And you can see that this is the biggest question, and then the next biggest question is the code me gave encourage. And you can see these are lower numbers, these are bigger numbers. Again, lower numbers and bigger numbers according to our mapping. And you can see that this is the difference here, and the mean and the overall mean and so on and so forth. So this just allows you to figure out, because it's not always like this isn't always going to be bigger than this number. Sometimes this number is lower. Let's see if we can find one. Maybe not in this particular case. These guys may all be higher. Well, in this case, it looks like they're all higher, but we can go to a different group, a different cluster, because that's cluster 0, and now we're at cluster 1, and we're still looking at 31. You can see the BMI, you can see the size of it still. This mean is 2.2. Okay, here's one. So DD identity. This particular cluster has 0.5 as the mean, and the overall mean is 1.61. And you can see 0 meaning not true for me, or 4 meaning very true. And you can make this bigger. It's sort of hard to get to. Can make this, you can use this little button here, but it's sort of hard to get to in this particular case because there's a down arrow on this thing. Anyway, you can look at it and sort of see how this particular cluster answered questions, the ones that made them different than everyone else in that particular way. Okay, so that's the cluster difference. It's pretty decent way of sort of looking at it and seeing what's different about each cluster compared to the rest. And you can do a one-to-one analysis. Well, let's just demonstrate that. So we'll look the difference between cluster 0 and cluster 1, and include negative ones in this case. I think these are the 2 clusters that didn't have null values, which is what we assigned to -1. So, but if you don't want to see those, you can click the button here, and it'll take those away. And we'll just put a bunch of them on there. So how do these 2 clusters differ from each other? Well, the size is 275, 224. You can see that the difference in the BMI. So the people or the folks that were assigned to cluster 1 or physically different than the ones that are assigned to cluster 0. And you can kind of see like cluster 0, 3.14. Well, what does that mean? They're closer to very true for me than not true for me. And what does that mean? This DD consistent. I don't remember off the top of my head what that code is for that particular question, but you could go back and look at that once you've sort of decided to look at that. Okay, so you can see how those two clusters are different, and you can only do two at a time. So remove one of the options. So if you wanted to, so now we feel pretty comfortable with the difference between 0 and 1. What if you want to know the difference between 0 and 2? You could look at that and you could see a whole bunch of negative ones, right? So again, that's going to be pretty much the big difference between some of these clusters. But if you take out the -1, you can see the differences that don't include the not answered, the questions that were not answered. Okay, I'm going to put them back in. And you can, because I mean, the way that we ordered the question may have affected the reason why people didn't answer those particular ones. So that actually might have a lot to do with what's happening in the data. But you can see that they're relatively close to each other as far as the BMI goes. And the next one is a bar chart. So we can use bar charts to sort of compare. So we'll put a couple of the clusters. We'll just put them all in there, and you can see for this particular question, how did folks answer? And you can look at the bar chart and see that group 0 said 5 major aspect for that particular question. The WH aerobics. So I believe it means like, do you think aerobics is going to be a big part of your weight loss or whatever the question sort of said? And you can see group 0 said yes. It's about 60%, almost 60% of them said yes. And you can see what that number is as well. 57.82, 12.36. Had 4, meaning not necessarily a major aspect, but a pretty large aspect, and so on and so forth. You can see how the different groups responded. The overall stats gives you sort of what they look like overall, and these are the groups that were in there for each question, right? So, for example, if you're looking at NANs, right? So if you look across, you can see for group 2, every one of them did not answer this particular question. Group 3, 96% of them answered the question. But for the overall, 49.14 didn't answer the question. As far as 5 goes, you can see the difference between, you can see cluster 0 had 57%, cluster 1 had 30%, cluster 3, a very small number. And then overall, you only had 22% of the 900 people answer this question as a 5. And so that's sort of what this thing, it gives you a lot of information in a really small um, amount of area. So you can look at walking the same way. And again, it may really look really close. I mean, again, the reason why these people were clustered the way they were clustered is because of the way they answered these questions. But you can, I don't know, go to any sort of question that you're interested in. I don't know what WH. I don't really remember what all these mean, but you can just go through and hopefully find some interesting analysis when you do this. For example, I think most people answered these questions with HI on them. HI, lose control, and you can see never, rarely, sometimes, often, usually, always, and you can sort of see what's happening in there. Again, it gives you a bar chart, and you can very quickly see sort of where the different clusters line up. Okay, and then you got KDE charts, which are a little bit different than the bar charts. They may or may not give you a lot of information. And remember, some of these didn't answer the question at all, so you're not going to get anything. But we can go over to other questions and sort of see very quickly what the distributions look like. So the way that this was intended to be shown is you can very quickly kind of look down and go, okay, this one's to the right, this one's to the left, and so on and so forth. So if there's something interesting in the data, maybe these KDE charts can show you what they're doing. So again, you'd have to go through every single question and sort of link up and look down the chart and see if anything gives you anything that you'd like to check out. And if you wanted to take out one of the clusters, if you wanted to only look at maybe one cluster at a time or 2 clusters at a time with this, you could do that as well. And then finally, pivot analysis. This will allow you to do some pivoting on your questions and sort of, in this case, we used BMI as our sort of aggregated like response. Again, this is sort of an advanced feature, and you can play with this and sort of figure it out. But I'm not going to go into too many details about this particular thing, just because you could check things and do whatnot, and it could really mess up. I mean, it could give you an error down here, but that's okay, because you could just unclick some of the things and it'll come back. Anyway, so that's the analysis part of this thing, and it's really just for experimentation and sort of trying to figure out what information that you could gather from your survey that could possibly help you out in your research. So that is all I got. Hopefully, you guys got something out of this and can basically use this tool in the future.